Welcome to MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 567. This program is in loving memory of Miriam Baselio Altes Allah Shalom and in merit of Baruch ben Yom Benucha Lana Altes, Conceal ben Leah Rochel and Rochel Basliba Farkash, dedicated by Pinchas Toders ben Miriam and Sarah Bas Rochel Altes. So we are right in the middle of the month of Cheshvan, the month that comes after Tishrei, and we've entered into what we call the regular year, unpacking the energy, the resources that we were empowered with throughout the rich month of Tishrei. But it's not just a month that follows. Every time, every moment in time has its own energy, has its own avodah. Kol yema v'yema over Davidite is how the Zohar puts it. Every day has its role, has its function, has its avodah. So, where are we this week? What is the energy of this week? So we draw it from the parsha of the week. This is the week that begins parsha Chayei Sarah. We also draw it from any special days of this week. And we do have a special day. We have Chof Cheshvan on Tuesday, the 20th of Cheshvan, is the birthday, the 165th birthday of the Rebbe Rashab, 5th Chabad Rebbe, born on Chof Cheshvan, Tov Reish Chof Aleph, the equivalent of 1860. Because it was still, the secular year was still 1860, but Tov Reish Chof Aleph, and here we are now, Tov Shin Pei Vov. So let's begin with that, being that it's right here, right around the corner. And then we'll talk about parsha Chayei Sarah and other relevant and timely matters. So, a Rebbe, a Nasi B'Hador, a leader of a generation, is a central figure that has many lessons for us. And the first question that we have to ask ourselves is, what is the Rebbe Rashab about? And what do we learn from him? So someone asked a question, I think appropriate to begin with, is who was the Rebbe Rashab named after? So we know his name was Abshalom Dov Ber. So who is he named after? Do we know if the Rashab was named after the Mittler Rebbe, and if so, why was the name Sholem added? Because the Mittler Rebbe's name is Dov Ber. Why was Sholem added to his name, which wasn't part of the Mittler Rebbe's name? And the answer is because the Rebbe Rashab was named after two great-grandfathers. One, the great-grandfather from the fact that Mittler Rebbe is the father and the father-in-law of the Tzemach Tzedek and the father of the Tzemach Tzedek's Rebbe, Tzemach Mushke, who in turn had a son, the Rebbe Marash, and then the Rebbe Rashab. And the Tzemach Tzedek also had a father called Sholem Shachne. So Sholem is the other name, Sholem Dov Ber, therefore a combination of these two. That's the historical aspect of it. But everything has deeper meaning. When the Rebbe Rashab was born, the Tzemach Tzedek, of course, was around, physically in this world, and Tzemach Tzedek said about him, when his name was named, he said the Rashab is the Asi's Bosar. Same letters as Bosar, which means flesh. His Akeidah is to transform Bosar into Shevet, into nourishment. And that indeed was the Akeidah of the Rebbe Rashab, to be mamshich and unite and integrate Shalom. Kol HaTorah le'nitna el laseh Shalom ba'elam. Shalom is also one of the names of Hashem. And to integrate it with Dov Ber, which in Yiddish and Hebrew, Dov is a bear, and Ber in Yiddish is a bear. Mesurbal b'bosar. A bear, the Gemara says, is known for it being very thick. Its flesh is thick. Representing the material world, tachtenim, but the goal is to transform it, to turn it, to bring Bamshich Shalom, the peace and the wholesomeness and the completeness of Elokus in Basar. Tzemach Tzedek also said that is born on Chof Cheshvan in the year Tov Reish Chof Aleph represents Keser. Chof is a Rosh Tevis of Keser, and also Gematria Esrim, which is 20, as well as Kisra, the letters Tov Resh Chof Aleph. So in Aramaic, Kesed is written with an Aleph at the end, so Kisra is the year of the Kesed. And indeed, we find that Rebbe Rashab, especially in Ayin Beis, the whole Ayin Beis is built upon the concept of Kesed as he begins the Hemshech. Kesed is the interface, as he calls it, the Mamutza, the Rotzen, which is the first step that you have when you want to be related to, want to engage with something, you want to have a relationship with something, you need a Rotzen, Kesed. So Rebbe Rashab discusses it, and he himself served that role. Now, obviously, every Yid is a certain type of interface between godliness and existence. But and every leader, of course, and a Rebbe. But then there are Rebbes, but due to the situation of the time or the challenges they were facing, where you see it more boilet, more stands out more. And we see that in the Rebbe Rashab's times. Look at the historical times in which he lived. As I said, he was born in 1860. Talking about the second half of the 19th century. The big upheavals and changes that would take place, especially in the early 20th century, was all within the time of the Rebbe Rashab's leadership. It was Tsarist Russia at that point, but then in the early 20th century came the Russian Revolution, which the Rebbe Rashab experienced, and World War I, to the point that caused the Rebbe Rashab to have to leave Lubavitch and move to Rostov in Tov Resh Ayin Vov, equivalent of 1915. And the Rebbe Rashab, as a true leader and a true Rebbe, prepared his Chassidim, prepared the world, you can say, through the Chassidus that he taught, through the directives that he gave, and the yeshiva that he established, Tomchei Tmimim, in 1897, Tov Resh Nun Zayin, as training ground for the students to become soldiers and fight the battles that would be coming, the spiritual battles of an assimilated world, challenging godliness, challenging Mashiach, as the Rebbe Rashab said in his famous Sikha, in Tov Resh Samach Aleph, Simchas Torah, Kol HaYetzel Mechames Beis David, all those that go out and they wage war for the war of the house of David, and said those are the Talmidim of Tomchei Tmimim. So the Rebbe Rashab, in all his Akeidah, was a transition, you can say like a keser, Chof Kisra, a kesher between Shalom and Deber, between bringing godliness of the old world into the new world with all its challenges. Until this day, we benefit from that, because the Rebbe Rashab's Chassidus, and of course the yeshiva that he established, and establishing also that his son, who had become the Frierdiker Rebbe, became the head of the yeshiva, would perpetuate and continue to the next generation, the sixth generation, which was the Frierdiker Rebbe from 1920 to 1950, his leadership, and then followed by the seventh generation, our Rebbe, 1950 and on. So all this was set in motion by the Rebbe Rashab, who in turn was a bridge, obviously, from the Rabbeim before him. So that's somewhat of an overview of the Rebbe Rashab and his times, and giving us the tools and resources necessary to be able to deal with the challenges of our times. So then we can ask the next question, what lessons do we learn from the Rebbe Rashab for our times? Well, with all the upheavals going on today, very different than back in the 19th and 20th century, but still, we all know who was just elected in as mayor of the largest Jewish city outside of Israel, New York. And many people are concerned, very concerned about it. We have a country, the United States, the rising extreme left, and even on the right, anti-Semitism, anti-Israel, and of course the challenges that Israel faces in the Middle East. So on one hand, thank God we have many blessings, and God protects, and look what has happened in the last few years, miraculous. But we still have our challenges. So where do we get strength from? Where do we get direction from? Hashem gave us Torah, strength, and shalom. and specifically through Primis HaTorah, that illuminates the neshama, the soul of Torah, and gives us that inner strength and connection to feel the trust, the faith, and to bring godliness into our lives. And the Rebbe Rashab played a central role in doing that. He's called the Rambam of Chassidus, like the Rambam who codified and took the written Torah and the oral Torah, as he writes in his introduction to Yad HaChazakah, distilled it into one sefer, a volumes, but one large work, magnum opus, organizing all the halachas in an organized way. So too the Rebbe Rashab did that with Chassidus Chabad. Sugyas. In turn, giving us this comprehensive blueprint, and you see it especially in Ayin Beis, the blueprint of how, on a cosmic level, we can fulfill the mission of our lives in taking a very dark, and you can say very hostile world, to morality, to moral clarity, to moral compass. We have a tremendous vacuum existing. So Primis HaTorah, namely Chassidus, gives us the tools how to bring a passionate, divine experience to every person on this earth, Jews as well as non-Jews. And furthermore, the Rebbe Rashab didn't just do it through books and discourses, but he established a yeshiva, and as he said, it was a training ground. He said there are many yeshivas, many very good yeshivas. He didn't come to create another yeshiva. He created a yeshiva that would take the Torah that the students learn and turn it into an army. An army that would fight the wars, as he said, those that reject godliness, those that reject Mashiach, and would infuse and instill in people that connection. So all the challenges we face today, the Rebbe Rashab planted the seeds and gave us these tools. So that's the most obvious lesson. Which brings me to the next question that someone asks. Did the Rebbe Rashab pick the souls of the students of Tomchei Tmimim? Is there a teaching that before the Rebbe Rashab opened Tomchei Tmimim is the name of the yeshiva, founded in 1897, Tov Rish Nun Zayin, that the Rebbe Rashab opened Tomchei Tmimim, he handpicked all the neshamas that he wanted to study in his school when it opened and also in the future. Yes, we know that firstly he handpicked out of many students, the best students for the first 20-some students that yeshiva began with, but he also picked the neshamas. We hear that in a number of sichas. The Rebbe speaks about it, Friedrich Rebbe. In other words, is an integral bond between every neshama of every student that would ever go to Tomchei Tmimim and the Rebbe Rashab, and then by extension the Friedrich Rebbe and the Rebbe, because it's their yeshiva. To understand this better, let us go to the next question. Why did he refer the Rebbe Rashab to these students as soldiers going out to battle of the house of David? And how does that explain the responsibilities of all the students? So as I mentioned, there's a sicha, Tafrei Samach Aleph, Simchas Torah, when the Rebbe Rashab spoke, Kol Yesel Mechames Beis David. Sicha cited quite a few times by the Rebbe that these are soldiers, spiritual soldiers, taking Torah and Primis HaTorah and Chassidus and turning it into a viable plan that helps people reconnect, reignite their passionate relationship with Hashem and fulfilling the mission that they were charged with in this world. As I said, he talks about 2 generations of opposition, those opposing God, those opposing Mashiach. Exactly what happened over the years. And this is all, remember, pre-World War I. So came World War I and World War II. And we know the upheavals that those wars created. And then came a great renaissance. Because the Rebbe Rashab established the yeshiva, the Rebbe, Friedrich Rebbe first, then the Rebbe, had now ready soldiers to send out on shlichus. Had there not been a yeshiva, there would be no students studying in the Chabad system. Here they're being trained to go out and be soldiers, exactly what you see in the Chabad houses that spread all over the world. And that's why the Rebbe Rashab referred to it as Milchama. Milchama is Beis David, a spiritual war, but nevertheless a war. And a war to be fought b'darkei neim, b'darkei shalom, in a peaceful way, in a pleasant way, to bring light, and light automatically dispels darkness. So what's the takeaway from all of this? What's the takeaway? The takeaway is, as the Rebbe says in a number of places, when we talk Chof Cheshvan, that we, especially on this day, dedicate extra time to learn and study the Rebbe Rashab's Chassidus, to implement his directives. And even though you may not be a Tomim, may not be still studying yeshiva, a Tomim is Kedusha Le'Zazim Kema, the Rebbe emphasizes. I remember the 80th anniversary of Tomchei Tmimim and Tov Shalom Zayin. The Rebbe spoke strongly about that. That a Tomim always remains a Tomim, even after he leaves the yeshiva, even after he marries and builds his life. That which he learned in yeshiva remains eternal. So it's the studying of the Rebbe Rashab's Tatus, fulfilling his directives. I remember in Tov Shem Amal, the Rebbe spoke of very powerful sikh, how we close our eyes and imagine the Rebbe Rashab in Lubavitch. So wherever you are, whether it's New York or wherever you be, we connect to the eternal power of the Rebbe Rashab. With that said, let me share the following on a personal note. So the Rebbe Rashab began Hemshech Ayin Beis. Ayin Beis is the year 1912, Shavuos. In the year 2012, decided to honor the centennial, celebrate the centennial, we'd start learning a daily class in Ayin Beis, which I was doing for the last 13 years. We just finished a month ago, learning every day. There are over 1,470 pages of Ayin Beis, with a group of students. Before COVID, we'd learned it actually at my table. After COVID, we moved to Zoom and YouTube. So we'll soon be celebrating, we'll make a big siyum. But meanwhile, maskifim hasof lahaschala, like we do on Simchas Torah, when you finish, you start. So we decided on Chof Cheshvan this week, we're going to begin a new shir, continuing, this time, the Hemshech Samach Vov. So even though Hemshech Samach Vov was written and delivered before Ayin Beis, but we're going to learn that 61 discourses that span from the years 1905 through 1907. And we're going to be learning that, and I invite and welcome everyone to join. Go to samachvav.com, samachvav.com, which is on the ChassidusApplied.com website. And you can find more details how to log in. It's a class that begins every weekday, from Monday through Friday, at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time, till 10:30. On Sundays, it begins at 10 and goes approximately to around 11:30. This is live streamed, both on Zoom and on YouTube. You can participate, ask questions. It's text-based, but everything is explained. You can also listen and watch it and at your convenience anytime, because it's all archived. You can find it all in the playlists of our YouTube channel, namely the channel of ChassidusApplied.com. Okay. So it's all fulfilling what the Rebbe Rashab wanted of us. Now keep in mind, all the Rabbeim are one entity, essentially. They have different ways of expressing themselves, different levels of oyer. But the moyer, as the Rebbe points out, is shalshelis, is not a shalshelis. Shalshelis is an oyer, a type of chain, a series, a sequence. But all the Rabbeim, the moyer of the Rabbeim, is one essence. So essentially, the Rebbe Rashab, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe, going back, Rebbe Marash, the Tzemach Tzedek, Mittler Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe are all part of one entity. The Rebbe Rashab, you see how he brings together Chassidus from all the Rabbeim, obviously those before him. Okay, so that covers Chof Cheshvan. Let us move now. We are in the week of parsha Chayei Sarah, which is now after Bereshis Noyach Lech Lecha V'Yeda Chayei Sarah, the 5th chapter, and this continues the narrative and begins Vayiyu Chayei Sarah, Vayiyu Shnei Chayei Sarah, the years of Sarah, Me'eh Shana, V'Esim Shana, V'Sheva Shana, 127 years, and how she passes, and Avram seeks and looks for a place for her, and finally buys a plot in Chevron, Maras HaMachpelah. And then the continuing story, how he begins to send out Eliezer, his servant, to go find a shidduch for Yitzchak, and goes to Psuel and Lovin, and finally finds Rivka, and brings her back. Yitzchak sees that she's like his mother, the ultimate queen, and he marries her. Then the parsha continues that Avram afterwards, after Sarah's passing, takes Hagar back to Torah. They have more children, sends these children to the east. And then we read about Avram's passing. And Yishmael returns and does tshuva and assists Yitzchak and gives him the honor that preceding him in the burial, interment of Avram Avinu. So, of course, the immediate question is, Torah is Melashon Hira, as the Rebbe emphasizes so many times. What lessons do we learn from living with the times with this week's Torah parsha? As the Alter Rebbe says, we live with the times. So there are many lessons, of course, both timeless lessons and also timely lessons. So one of the most timeless lessons that we've heard many times is from the very first verse, the opening and the name of the chapter. You would think, if the name of a chapter left the life of Sarah, you would think that the story is going to talk about her life. But lo and behold, you continue to read the first verse. No, it's talking about Chayei Sarah. It's not the life of Sarah. These are the years that she lived, and it talks about her passing, actually, and her burial, and all that comes after that. It's all post Sarah's life. If you want to dedicate a chapter to Sarah's life, it would be the previous chapter. So it's true, the names of the chapters follow the first words, but that itself is the question. And one of the most powerful and beautiful answers is, because the Torah is telling us what true life is. If you want to know the life of someone, don't look at just their biological life while they're alive physically and walking this earth. And obviously they have impact. You want to see whether they truly lived? Is see what happens afterwards. Are they remembered? Are people emulating the role model that they demonstrated? And that's what you see here. This week's chapter, you see Sarah coming alive in the fullest sense of the word. Not just because she was physically present, because her spiritual presence, her values, her standards, her legacy lives on through Avram and Yitzchak. To the point that Yitzchak's wife, Rivka, he knows she's for him because she emulates. She mirrors Sarah in the three elements that the Torah tells us. One, they saw a candle burning by her from Friday to Friday, reminding him of his mother Sarah. Second, a blessing in the Isa, in the dough. She had a blessing. And the third is in the Onon, the cloud that surrounded her tent. And these represent the three mitzvahs that are acronym for Chana or Hachein, Chala, Nida, and Adlokas Neris. Chala is the Isa, the dough. Nida is the cloud, represents family purity. And the third, Hadlokas Neris, lighting candles, the foundations of a Jewish home. So we see from this, what is true life? True life is what you see afterwards, what impact that person has. There are many people who live, while they're physically alive, people are terrified of them, they wield tremendous power, money, but as soon as they're gone, they're not remembered. As a matter of fact, some people are relieved. You want to see true Chayei Sarah? Look at the effect. Look that here we are thousands of years later talking about her, learning from her, being empowered. That's true Chayei Sarah. And the second lesson, as I said, we learn also what her qualities are. And how when we look for a mate in our own lives, a soulmate, we look to emulate those qualities. We have a model. We have an example, a living role model, dugma chaya, of what we should be looking for in our spouses. Okay. Obviously, there are more lessons, but we'll suffice with that. The next question someone asked is this: how can we see the evolution of Judaism and Jewish thought through the stories of the forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the matriarchs, Sarah, Rivka, Leah, and Rachel? How can we see the evolution of Judaism through the stories of the patriarchs and matriarchs? So this is based on the statement that we've reviewed a number of times, Maisa Ove Simin Labanim. The actions, the lives, the narratives, the encounters of the Oves, of our patriarchs, is Simin Labanim. It's a guide, a sign that directs us, the children. So the questioner is asking, how do you see that evolution? So it's quite clear when we say Elokei Avram, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. The same thing with the Emois. It's progressive. Each of the patriarchs and matriarchs added to the one before them. In the language of Chassidus, Avram is Chesed, Yitzchak is Gevura. Avram Chesed, Chesed LaAvram. Pachad Yitzchak is Yira, reverence, and Yaakov is Teferes, compassion. So there you have the cycle of the three main emotional spheres, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, and the same continues. When you go all the way till the seventh generation, which will be Moshe, is like Malchus, V'shachanti b'seichem, bringing the Shekhinah down below. So the progression is essentially not just a technical one, but each of them is adding another spiritual dimension in the refinement of this universe. Echad Avram, he was the pioneer. But then Yitzchak added to him. He was more chesed, Yitzchak was more gvura. And Yaakov is Teferes, blending them both and going beyond that as well. There are many lessons for that in our lives, because like everything in life, it's a journey. And the patriarchs and matriarchs represent that journey. And when we read the narratives in these week's chapters, we read their story, which is our story. And we see it progress, one building upon the previous one. The next question. How old was Rivka when she married Yitzchak? So there are actually several opinions on this. Rashi brings from Seder Elam, from Medrash, 3 years old. You have Tosfos and other places, Midrashim, that say 14 years old. And then there's that say she's a Naira. Naira is approximately between 12 and 13 or 14. Okay, now keep in mind that ages then were very different than today. People lived, till 75, 100. After the Mabel went down to 120, before that it was even longer. So the ages and maturity levels very different than today. But how do we explain the opinion of 3 years old? It seems extremely young to get married. And actually, it could seem almost unseemly. So there are different answers given for it. One, as I said, we don't know what that age in those years, what they were capable of. 3 years could be much more mature than we have it today at 3 years old. A second can be 3 is not necessarily the actual number 3, more like a symbolic element, a little spiritual element. But she was 14 as according to the other opinions, so you don't have that disagreement. Because it doesn't say anyway that she was 3 years old in the Torah. We have to derive it from calculating the years of Yitzchak, how old he was, 37 by the Akeidah, and then when Rivka was born. But bottom line is, however you explain it, whether it was a different time, and therefore age meant something very different, meaning people were capable of doing things much earlier. Or, as I said, it doesn't mean physical, it's more spiritual, and her real age was 14. However you explain it, bottom line is that we're dealing with a holy woman, a tzaddikus. Can we learn from the fact that she wasn't able to have children initially? Was that due to her age? Was it due to another factor? From the Torah, it seems that was through prayer that she ultimately conceived. It wasn't just a matter of age. But that's for another time to discuss. Okay. Since we're in Chayei Sarah, and there was a few follow-up questions to Vayera, last week's chapter, let me just go through a few things in last week's chapter. So we spoke last week a whole bunch of different details. Oh, I should add, someone wrote about the 3 years old. Let me just add this. How do we understand the commentaries that say Rivka was 3 years old when she married Yitzchak? Doesn't that seem a little bizarre? If we want to say 3 back then wasn't the same as 3 today, we can also say 90 and 100 weren't the same then and today. So maybe it's not a big deal that Avram and Sarah were elderly when they had a baby. Maybe Avram and Sarah weren't 90 and 100 because they counted differently back then. So just to add that since someone wrote that, I just wanted to throw that in. It doesn't change much of what we said. But now let's go to parsha Vayera, where we discussed quite a few items. There's a few questions that remain that were asked afterwards. Why did God consider concealing his plan to destroy Sodom from Abraham? Did Hashem have doubts if he could trust Avram, and therefore he considered hiding from Avram that he planned to destroy Sodom? And this is the parsha that says, Machasa anima Avram, will I conceal from Avram what I plan to do? A man who will become a great nation, dedicating himself and his family to preserve God's path, to perform tzedakah mishpat, virtue and justice and kindness. Will I conceal it from him? So what's the consideration? Why would God conceal it? So in simple pshat, it's because he didn't want Avram to give him a hard time. Not that he was afraid, but he knew Avram would challenge as he actually did. That's on a very basic level. But if you think deeper, Amachase refers to a level of kisuyas, almadiskasya, God's hidden plans. And what the Torah is coming to tell us, and this comes to answer another question, why do we need to know this? If at the end of the day he didn't conceal it, God should have just said, here's what he told Avram, and this is what happened. Why do we need to know that Hashem is thinking, should I conceal it? Because indeed he was revealing something that's beyond revelation. And because Avram earned his way, committing his life, his children's life, generations to come till this very day, Hashem said, he's worthy of hearing my innermost thoughts, the machasa, that which is an alma discussing the concealed worlds. And he was indeed worth. And that's why Hashem revealed to him. So we know now the events that would happen. This was talking about the destruction of Sodom. But there's a machasa part to it, God's mysterious plans that we don't always understand. But Avram, he revealed it to him. So that is essentially why God considered. What was considered true justice, sparing or destroying Sodom? Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. I have a question about the episode of Vayera. We learned that Avram argues with Hashem on behalf of the wicked city of Sodom and its environs, its surrounding cities. He argues, Avram, Hashem kol haaretz lo ya'aseh mishpat, that the judge of the entire universe is not going to do justice. I see it exactly the opposite, this person writes. We all have learned how wicked and cruel the inhabitants of Sodom were. If Hashem hadn't punished them with brimstone and fire, my question would be, Hashem kol haaretz lo ya'aseh mishpat? Can you explain, please? So which one is it? And the answer, both are true. That Sodom deserved punishment is clear. But Avram was arguing that maybe there are 50 tzaddikim. Now he knew Lot was there. He was looking for some redeeming element that those tzaddikim can do tshuva. So what's justice? Justice is obviously giving people the cause and effect that they bring upon themselves for good or for the opposite. But justice is also to be fair and to know if there's someone that's innocent. They shouldn't be killed. The innocent shouldn't be killed with the wicked. So Avram was speaking from the perspective of finding a merit, a limud zchus, and hopefully something can be redeemed. The Malach was saying, and Hashem was saying, but the wicked people ultimately Avram could not prevail because he couldn't find innocent people. So then, of course, came their destruction. And that was the justice done. Okay. And finally, one more question that came in about this. Why was Sarah not told about the Akeidah? At the end of the parsha in Vayera, talks about the binding of Yitzchak, and we all talk about Avram's Mesiras Nefesh and Yitzchak's Mesiras Nefesh, but why was Sarah, his mother, not consulted, or at least informed? Especially she's the one that told Avram send away Yishmael, meaning she was extra sensitive to to Yitzchak. And indeed, we're told that after she found out, she died. And there's two opinions. She died from the shock that he survived. Another opinion, she died from the shock that he was bound in the first place and could have been killed. So there are different commentaries that talk about this. The Ramban, for example, says it wasn't a cover-up. Avram was Vayashkem Avram Babayker. He had to follow God's guidelines. And God wanted him to do it immediately. So he didn't have even the time to share. There are also different explanations. But the ultimate explanation is a mother and father have different roles. And her role was, yes, to protect Yitzchak and nurture him. It was not necessarily this role of this Nisayan. Furthermore, if you remember, we discussed, well, how is it possible even that Hashem should ask Avram? Because this is a Nisayan of Avram, not of Sarah. How do you love your son? Is it about you or is it about God? So Sarah clearly had that established. That's why she was extra sensitive and knew that Yishmael has to be sent away. He's a bad influence on Yitzchak. Avram was not as clear. And as such, Avram had to sacrifice that so-called biological love to turn it into a divine love. Because at the end of the day, Yitzchak was spared. The goal was not, God forbid, kill him. To offer him. To offer him, yes, but not actually to slit his throat, so to speak, not to shecht him. And that effort that Avram made, that he was ready, that infused his connection with Yitzchak and his connection with Hashem on a whole different level. Okay. Now let's talk about some other matters, a little more timely matters. So now that New York has elected Zoran Mamdani with all his credentials, or also lack of credentials, of leadership. So someone writes, what now what? Well, now that this is what's happened, Lev Sarma Melachim Biyad Hashem, the heart of leaders is in the hands of Hashem. And we said this about even Parei and the Czars and the biggest Seder Yisrael. That's not because we like them and not because we supported their policies, but because God has his mysterious ways. Trachtud v'zayngut, which means not trying to be frivolous about it. I'm not suggesting he's suddenly going to become a lover of Jews. B'derech HaTeva, he's going to continue to spout what he believes. But we have to understand there is a deeper plan. And in thinking about it, and continuing the discussion we had last week, perhaps New York got what it deserved. Perhaps this is a wake-up call to tell us how vacuous and the vacuum that exists in this country, including New York, that's allowing a radical left to arise. So it's a wake-up call. What are we doing with our young? What are we educating? What are we teaching them? Another point is sometimes seeing someone declaring their, let's call it hatred, or their discrimination against you is better than keeping it concealed. And maybe that's part of also let it reveal its ugly head. And ultimately, And ultimately, everything leads toward the good. I don't know what's going to happen exactly. I don't know how radical he'll be. I don't know what kind of pushback there'll be. I'm sure some people will run to try to escape. But I remember Crown Heights when I was a child. It was a beautiful little part of this city. And then in the early 60s and mid-60s, all the unrest with the civil rights movement that began in all the downtowns, including New York and Detroit and Chicago and Cleveland and Pittsburgh and so on. And people ran. The white people of this community all ran. I remember a block I lived on, mostly Jews, white Jews. After the summer, they never returned. We were the only whites left. And it was so depressing. And prices of houses were dropping. And there were the blockbusters that helped feed the panic. And the Rebbe stood his ground. We don't run. To the point he gave out a powerful talk in 1969, Pesach. Achar Pesach already published. We don't run. We stand strong. He told people to invest in real estate. Those that did made a fortune. And it will return if we stand strong. If we give in, then it'll have that domino effect. I remember saying it actually when Mayor Giuliani came to Hol Torah. There was a Chanukah Sabayas. They expanded the building. So they asked me to be the MC. So I said to Mayor Giuliani, I said, we have to thank the Lubavitch Rebbe because he drew a line in the sand that we would not allow what happened to Brownsville and East Flatbush and East New York and Bedford-Stuyvesant and Bushwick. They all fell. They became slums. Well, we will not run. Many ran, and the Rebbe tried to convince people not to run. Now I look at Crown Heights, years later, it turned around. So sometimes you need to hit rock bottom before. I remember 1991, the pogrom in Crown Heights, and the tragic murder of Yankel Rosenbaum in cold blood, looting, breaking of windows. I remember this. And Mayor Dinkins at the time, David Dinkins, told the police to stand down. And as a result, he lost the next election. And what came in, Giuliani came in his place. And turned New York around, turned it into a renaissance in real estate, in business, financially. The extreme reduction of crime, the subway's safer. So whatever happens, it'll either be revealed good or it's going to be a good that will come out from the darkness. And that's how we have to take the approach. We don't cower, we don't retreat, we don't surrender. I'm sure there'll be people, especially if they hear policies that are draconian, there were those that will run. And that will be the consequences of this. And hopefully everyone will become wiser. And those of us that do see and are not misled have to recognize this country has become polarized. And there's a tremendous vacuum, and there's a certain discontent and uncertainty. And we are at a time of serious transition. So those of us that see clearly have to teach and educate and inform and empower and bring light and expose all darkness and hatred wherever it rears its ugly head. That's the what now. And we'll see where this, or now what, we'll see where this goes. On a topic unrelated, we began talking about the tragic death of a young 20-year-old in Eretz Yisrael last week. So, not that I want to talk about negative things, but these questions do come in quite often, and I'm going to address it. So, talking about premature death, so we talked about the events that I mentioned and the sensitivity that this should elicit in each one of us and our commitment to be good people. So an unrelated question goes like this. Many of us are shaken to the core when we see when we hear about accidental child deaths that occur under parental care, such as a child unintentionally left in a bathtub or in an overheated car. And I want to apologize if this is triggering anyone or anything I said here that is hurtful. But this program has always promised that we'll address issues without censorship. Nothing's taboo. This is on people's minds, so I'm addressing it. These tragedies, which occur worldwide and painfully within the Frum community as well, raise profound questions. To what extent, if at all, is the parent responsible for the child's passing? I'm making it a little milder. When there was no intent to harm, only a tragic human error. Does the Torah teach that from the moment of creation, Hashem determined this precious, innocent neshama is allotted years, 1, 2, 3, and so on, and that the gzeira, the decree, is fixed and renewed on Rosh Hashanah, irrespective of the parent's actions? If so, would the same outcome have occurred by other means at that very time without the parent's error? The apparent proof is that when Hashem does not decree a child's passing, similar circumstances often do not lead to death. For example, a child doesn't roll over in the tub, or someone notices in time and intervenes. While I can accept that some neshamas complete their earthly mission in a brief span, and that we cannot fully fathom Hashem's ways, why would a benevolent and just God allow not only the bereavement, but also the enduring anguish of self-blame for the parents? Is there an explanation that addresses this double suffering from a kind God, especially if the outcome could have occurred in another way? To me, it seems like the epitome of cruelty. Thank you in advance for the time and thought you can devote to addressing these complex questions and articulating the Torah Chassidus perspective. So, what shall I say? I'm humbled and honored that you trust me trying to answer this complex question. So we have to approach it by using precedent. And I just turned to the Rebbe. The Rebbe was asked this question many times, with the most pointed of all questions. Why? Why would God do such a thing? Premature, a child hasn't even begun to develop. Who knows where that child would go? So the Rebbe answers time and again, these are the mysteries that we don't have answers for, and we don't attempt to answer. We can look at precedent and see that there are times these things have been explained through the idea of Gilgal, which is reincarnation. And neshama sometimes comes and finishes his job, and then it can move on. But the Rebbe never goes ahead and tries to justify or explain. It's one of those things where you have to just say, I don't know. We cry together, we hold our hands, and we console each other. That is the Torah way. Vayidem Aaron. Aaron was silent when his children were taken. Shtei kachol b'machshav is what God says to Moshe, to the Malachim, when they claim, Zu Torah v'zu schar, this is Torah, this is its reward, when they saw the Roman Empire barbarically torturing and killing the greatest people of that generation that we mentioned, Eila Esker and Yom Kippur. We don't have answers. As the Rebbe emphasizes again, we don't know why. We ask, what are we going to do about it? That is the emphasis. How will we rebuild? How will we build something stronger? How will the memory of that person be preserved and perpetuated? So I'm not here going to be answering questions of why these things happen. As far as parents to blame, look, obviously negligence is negligence, but even that has to be also said sensitively. The last thing you want to do is come tell parents who lost a child in this tragic way, it's your fault. That's not the goal. It's not our job. We don't know all the factors. We don't know all the circumstances. Our job is to be compassionate, to be loving, to help them cope, to get through it. So we don't talk about that type of responsibility. Now, if there was negligence, criminal negligence, and there are those involved that have to deal with that to prevent further damage or future recklessness, that's another story that needs to be addressed case by case. But overall, that's not the way to go, and we don't even try to have the parents start assuming guilt. Guilt is a cancer, and shame. Unless it motivates, unless it helps the situation, just to feel guilty is also not an option. So we cry, and we try to improve our ways, as the Rambam says, when a tragedy or catastrophe happens. You fashrish b'maisav, you look into your soul searching, introspection, improving your ways. That's the way we react to it. That's the way we deal with it. And that's the most important thing to emphasize. Okay. A similar question came in. So we recall last week, it's already time has passed. I was going to discuss this last week, but there was no time. I'll address it now. After the flood, we learned in parsha Noach that Hashem promised Noach he would never destroy the world again by flood. Then how do we explain the terrible flood that hit Crown Heights? The person writes yesterday, but it was last week, in which a man was killed when his basement apartment flooded and he drowned trying to escape. If the Talmud says saving one life is like saving the entire world, and destroying one life is like destroying the entire world, then the life of this man who drowned is the entire world. So who's wrong, the Talmud's aphorism or Hashem's rainbow promises? You have permission to deviate from the standard canned answer of, we don't know Hashem's ways. It's not a canned answer. It's coming from the depths of my heart, and I'm actually offended by that type of line. It's the best answer that we have. We don't know Hashem's ways. But regarding this actual question, so first of all, the flood was, God said he'll never bring another flood to destroy the world. Didn't say there wouldn't be any torrential rains, and so on. So no comparison here. That's what the rainbow is about, and that's what the sign is about. But the fact is that people get hurt in what they call natural disasters or floods and so on. I don't have an answer. We don't know. And to take it a step further, the Rebbe emphasizes that if Hashem wanted us to know and we needed to know for our serving God, he would tell us. I think what's canned and distorted is when a person insists on trying to find out why God says. Maybe you have to ask yourself, what are you going to do about it? We don't like to hear that, because then the onus is upon us to do something. Now you'll say, you were not at fault, but you heard about it. And as such, it has to be that introspection. And it's actually a sign of strength to acknowledge that we don't understand everything. We don't know God's deeper plans. So we cry and we protest. And you can cry to God and say, Ad Mosai, how much more? And ask for the Gula by all means. But at the end of the day, what are you going to do? How will you become a better person? How will you bring more light into this world? How will that light dispel darkness? How will you help usher in a world where these things don't happen any longer? Yes, that's the responsible response. And it's frankly a cop-out in a way, like a crutch, to say, oh, let's figure out what God, how could God allow that? Again, by all means, I've seen the Rebbe cry out to God. Why? Ad Mosei, how much more? But it always translates into what we can do more. How we are partners with Hashem in making this world a better place. Okay. So this is also a little delayed, but I want to talk about protesting mandatory military service for yeshiva students. So this was a big piece of news a few weeks ago. We saw a big demonstration in New York, then a big demonstration in Israel. So the question is, what should our attitude be towards these protests? And I'll read it more in detail. How should we react to the giant protests by religious Jews in Israel against mandatory army service? I can understand them having a peaceful protest even if I don't agree with them. But there are disgusting videos online of misbehavior, throwing racks and bottles at reporters, and not obeying police officers' instructions. What's wrong with these people acting like donkeys and making a chil Hashem, desecrating God's name? How can we exist as a cohesive nation when we have extremist rabbis promoting this type of misbehavior? In summary, peaceful protest is a great tool to express your views. Even if your views are unpopular, rioting and acting like wild animals and zealots is counterproductive, unlawful, and makes everybody look bad. Okay. Well, I agree, and I'll take it a step further. Even peaceful protests, and with all respect to the rabbis, where's that a Torah approach? You want to lobby behind the scenes, you want to negotiate, you want to use your leverage, by all means. But why go out in the streets where it can be misunderstood? And more importantly, as I've heard from many people, if these people going out in the streets began by saying, our hearts are with all the people who died or murdered October 7th, Shmini Atzeres, and their families, and all those sacrificing their lives to protect other lives, so at least you feel that they're compassionate, that they're with us. You're in it together. And then a separate issue would be this mandatory military service. But you don't hear that. Furthermore, it's not like, I would think, okay, we are doing the spiritual part of the war by fighting through learning Torah. No. We don't want to have anything to do. The military is coming from a Zionist, anti-God movement. But you're being protected by these soldiers. At least say thank you. If you were living wherever you're living in the world, in Williamsburg, in Kiryat Yoel, or anywhere else in the world, and there were crimes, and there was a local shmira come together to protect men, women, and children in that town, and you say, no, I don't want to be part of it. Of course you have to be part of it. Unless you say, my work, not everybody's fighting on the front line. Some people are in communication, some people in intelligence, some people are manning the computers, whatever it may be. But everyone's part of it. So that just makes it even more grotesque. What kind of impression does it leave? People say, this is what you're focusing on, your own greedy needs? We'll talk about the issue, the very issue itself in a moment. But is this the way? Why don't those people who are protesting, what they should be doing is going to the military and going to Jews that they are neighbors and inspiring them and inviting them for Shabbos table or the holiday, helping them do mitzvahs. That is the way. But taking yourself out of the equation as if like you're holier than everyone, and it's all focused on your needs. Aren't the Jewish people one people? So it brings me to the next question. Is it appropriate for yeshiva students to join the military? Do we know what the Torah says is the halacha of army service? It seems some rabbis aren't following the Torah when they instruct their communities not to respond to army draft notices and to set tires and garbage cans on fire in the streets instead. If they follow the Torah, they can look to King David, who didn't wait for an army draft notice, but volunteered in advance on his own initiative to go battle Goliath when it was necessary to help protect the community from attacks. And when Yoav ben Tzruya, his commander-in-chief, went to war, David HaMelech said or composed psalms. And when Yeshua, the commander-in-chief in the time of Moshe, went to war with Amalek, same in other wars, what was Moshe doing? He was lifting his arms to pray to Hashem. All part of one battle. So you could say, how could we compare? But the bottom line is, these soldiers are sacrificing their lives to protect men, women, and children, including the protesters. So whether this is appropriate, that maybe is a case by case. If the yeshiva student is immersed in Torah, with the same commitment and passion as a military person. But this is Malchamta Shel Torah, a spiritual part of the war. Okay, everyone's doing their part, like Moshe and David HaMelech and so on. But if it's because you've taken yourself out, then you can go ahead and eat falafel and shawarma, while others are fighting and sacrificing their lives. There's something seriously wrong with that. You're benefiting from it, utilities, water, electricity, protection. So you can have ideological differences. But then there are certain things, Pekuach Nefesh, when it comes to life and death, that we have to think about. So you can see where I'm going with all of this. The bottom line is, I find these protests to be actually very disturbing. because the impression they leave is not a positive one. On the contrary, it sounds very selfish, self-absorbed, not focusing on the whole picture. And especially if you want something, there's ways to do it more discreetly, quietly, and have more effect. Okay. So we'll conclude with, on a positive note, someone asked the question, what do you suggest I say at an upcoming Bat Mitzvah of a relative? Let me read it in more detail. I have to speak at a Bat Mitzvah in a few weeks for a distant relative. There are plenty of sichos and mamorim about bar mitzvahs, about tefillin, but can I ask Rabbi Jacobson to direct me to some material relating to women, such as a good sikh or a mimer about lighting Shabbos candles and what they accomplished? Then I'll go study it and draw some nice lessons from it. Thank you. So I'm not sure whether this Bat Mitzvah happened, because this question did come in a few weeks ago. But being it's parsha Chayei Sarah, the perfect sikha for you. Go to volume 15, Likutei Sichos, Chayei Sarah. When the Rebbe came out and launched the campaign of Neshek, of men, women and girls lighting Shabbos candles, explained it at length based on the verse where Yitzchak brings Rivka into his tent and sees it looks exactly like Sarah, his mother's tent. And one of the three things is the Ner Shabbos Kodesh, lighting candles. It's a beautiful sikha, and we learn a lot from it. It's perfect for a Bas Mitzvah. And talk about the other two mitzvahs. Obviously, Taras Mishpacha will come later in a woman's life upon marriage. But the very ideas of living a sacred life, built on the three foundational elements of a Jewish home. Again, lighting Shabbos candles. 2, kosher. Bracha Mitzri Be'isa, the bracha in the dough. And 3, Taras Mishpacha, a pure family life, intimate life. That's the onan, Kshur Ala'il, the onan that was the cloud of glory that showed the dignity of God's presence there, is exactly what a Bas Mitzvah girl entering into the covenant, so to speak, becoming responsible, is to emulate. And Rivka, according to the best opinions, was around that age. She wasn't, either she was Bas Mitzvah or a little after Bas Mitzvah. You could add more. I'll just add one more thing. Lighting candles reminds me of a story. I remember speaking once at a class, and there was quite a large crowd, 100 and some people. And there was also a woman there with her daughter. And I was speaking about the custom that the custom of the land, at a birthday party, they bring a cake with a number of candles that correspond to the age of the child, lit candles, and they ask the child to blow out the candles. So I said, blowing out candles, a candle represents the soul. Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom. The lamp of God is the soul of man. Why would we want to burn out? We don't burn out candles. We don't blow out candles. On the contrary, a candle represents, as I said, the neshama. A little while later, the woman tells me that came the birthday party of the girl, and she repeated this. She said, I heard in the class that a neshama is represented by a candle. So why am I blowing out the candles? So this thought of the suggestion, from now on, instead of bringing lit candles, put candles there and let the girl light the candles. It's not Shabbos candles or Yom Tov candles, but it's the idea of illuminating, not burning out, not blowing out, but igniting candles. So you could add that as well into this. With that, we'll conclude here. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Should be a very pleasant and successful and happy week for all Eden everywhere, for people everywhere. And we should finally be zeicher to the Gula Amitis V'Ashleim in this month, just as the Beis HaMikdash was built, the first. So it's the third Beis HaMikdash in the final redemption.
This program is brought to you by MyLife Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at chassidusapply.com/donate.